Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is overwhelm and maybe strategies for dealing with the ever constant demands of many, many things in our lives. So before we get started, let's take a minute to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your electrons, all your molecules, creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, and allow that sensation to bring you present right here, right now, to this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Good morning, Rosalind. How great to start the week with you and with everybody else who's joining us. It's always such a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. So we're talking today about overwhelm because in our very, very busy world, there are constant demands and it's very easy to get overwhelmed by all the demands. And when we get overwhelmed, then our ability to fulfill our responsibilities, obligations to perform the tasks that we quote unquote need to do we just can get incapacitated by it. So Rosalind says overwhelm seems to be linked with deadlines or due dates. Well, I think that that's probably true, but it's not just the case, because I know that even when we're making our own deadlines and our own lists of to-dos, even without deadlines, we can become overwhelmed. My mom, God bless her, she's 91 years old, and she always has a list of to-dos, a list of all these things that she needs to get done. And some of them have deadlines, but most of them don't. But despite that, there is a relatively consistent sense of overwhelm about all these things to do. And so you kind of hit on one of our solutions to navigating this sense of overwhelm. There are certain things that are time urgent. And when we can start discerning the things that are time urgent from those other things that we would like to get done or that we need to get done, but it's not as immediate a requirement, that's the beginning of being able to sort this whole thing out so that we don't get overwhelmed. Overwhelm occurs as an internal conversation, really, because the truth is, even with deadlines, we're either going to make those deadlines or we're not. And some of those deadlines may be negotiable, or the things that have deadlines might not be as important as we think they are. So there might be things that are on our list that have deadlines that we can elect to just let it go by. So, in a work situation, I think that that occurs in all situations, work situations, as well as any other kind of time-driven or performance-driven activities. So I think that when we look at overwhelm, one of the biggest things that it becomes or that feeds that experience of overwhelm is certain expectations. And part of that expectation shows up as I should be able to do this, or maybe I've taken on too many things. And so if let's look at the I've taken on too much. There's a dynamic underlying taking on too much, feeling like you need to please others, perhaps because they are requesting certain things of you, and you say yes, you just say yes. And maybe that yes ends up putting you in a position where you're stretched beyond your limits and you can't meet that expectation of the other person or of yourself to be able to fulfill it. So this is a really important thing. I know that there are a lot of people that would rather say yes. Rosalind says obligations that can't be met. Exactly. They can't be met either because you truly don't have the capacity, or because you don't prioritize things in order to meet those obligations. So obligations, I want to talk about obligations and expectations as part of this whole dynamic with overwhelm, because we can take on obligations and responsibilities. We can take on commitments to try and be nice to somebody, to try and make something easier for somebody else. But the thing is that if we don't fulfill on those expectations or those commitments or those obligations, then we're creating an even worse situation than if we had just been able to say no in the first place. And so this is an important part of the dynamic of overwhelm, is just saying yes to things, because then if we've said yes to something that we don't have the capacity to fulfill on, then we've set up an internal dynamic for guilt, shame, blame, all kinds of other internal experiences that can jeopardize our relationships, can jeopardize our position in work, and it has a lot of ramifications. So whereas saying no to something might have been uncomfortable in the first place, it's not nearly as uncomfortable as all the other dynamics that get set in motion when we are unable to fulfill on a commitment we've made. So one way to avoid or to not put yourself in a position of overwhelm is to learn how to say no to things that that are beyond your capacity to fulfill on. So that's a big deal. That's part of integrity, is to say, or no, and I can get it done by this date instead. So maybe I can't fulfill on getting it done by the date that you're requesting, and I can realistically complete that task by this date. So that's one place, is learning to set realistic expectations for yourself, with yourself and with others. So that's number one. And by the way, if you guys are leaving comments and I'm not responding to them, please go to the Facebook page for Enlightened World Network and put your comments in there, and then I should be able to see them, and I'd be happy to respond to them. So, so that's number one, is being responsible, being accountable, being in integrity in the things that we agree to do, so that we are able to actually fulfill on them, given our schedule and our other commitments. That's one. Another is that we get to look at the list of our to-dos, to get to look at the list of all of our commitments, or the things that are on our to-do list, and really start sorting through those things to determine what our true priorities are. So to your comment, Rosalind, obligations that can't be met, a lot of the things that we have on our to-do lists are not priorities. And we can tell that they're not priorities because we don't ever get to them. So what we get to do then is maybe be a bit more honest about our to-do list. You know, those things that are sitting there that have sat there for multiple iterations of our to-do lists, and they haven't been addressed. We get to just maybe take them off the list, or to put them in a someday, one day list. And then we can remove that from our attention, and then that will reduce the number of things on the list, which can then reduce our experience of overwhelm, because there's not so much on that list that we're constantly being reminded of that we're not doing. So this is an important thing, because when we have things on our to-do list that we ignore, or that go to the bottom of the list time after time after time, we get to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we don't care as much about getting that thing done as we might have thought. Like, it's just not as important. And if it is that important, then maybe what we get to do is to schedule a block of time specific to that thing, so that we truly do give it the attention that it warrants. So there's a decision point. And when we look at, so as far as to-do lists go, there's a couple of things. I'm trying to get the chair back, or at least part of the chair back in this background thing. And so I apologize if it's super distracting for you, the way it floats in and out of existence. And I kind of love that as a metaphor, you know, the things floating in and out of existence with these virtual backgrounds that we've got. Anyway, going back to this to-do list, what happens that can contribute to overwhelm is that we carry all this stuff in our heads, and we're trying to remember 1,000,001 things. And in trying to remember them, then that in itself becomes an effort and an expending of energy that can be very distracting. So one thing that we can do to manage ourselves more effectively is to get all these things out of our head into paper, or into a system where we can record it, so we don't have to be thinking about it so much. And as we get these things out of our head, then we get to categorize them, so that there are certain things that are urgent, there are certain things that are someday, one day, and then there are other things that are kind of like our mundane list of to-dos, some of which may have a deadline, some of which may not. And by sorting these things into different categories and getting them out of our head and documented in some way, shape, or form, then we can relieve our brain from the constant demand of trying to stay on top of all those things, the constant demand of trying to remember all of it. So that relieves some of the pull that those things might have in our awareness, right? And then this sorting of things can be really, really valuable. So we might have an A list of things that must be done today. And then what we could do is maybe choose one thing from a B list that's a possible, or something that is on our to-do list, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen today. The other thing that can help with managing all these to-dos and time management is to estimate the amount of time each of these things would take, and to break them down, break these tasks into smaller tasks. So for instance, let's say I have this task, this to-do, like set up website. Well, the thing is that that's such a daunting task. It's not just a task, it's a project. And within that project, it has a whole bunch of subtasks. And the subtasks might be, choose the look and feel, create a logo, set up the URL, figure out what platform you're going to be building the website on, write the about me page, write the content for the different pages. So there are all these different tasks, and sometimes there are tasks like if you're going to look for, part of a website is find a hosting service. So that in itself takes research and takes a bunch of time. So when you take these tasks and break them down into smaller tasks, some of those tasks that are the smaller tasks are going to only take a minute or two. And some of them are going to take hours. And so when you break things down into manageable tasks or specific information bites, then it's a much more approachable objective, and you can be whittling away at the task or at the project bit by bit by bit. So this is also an important thing, is to identify and make a distinction between tasks and projects. So anything that has more than 2 steps is a project. And even if it's a small project, it's a project. So when you take that project and break it down into bits that you can wrap your head around, that you can fulfill, in step by step, then it makes something a whole lot more manageable, and it can feel a whole lot less overwhelming. When you don't know what you're in for, then it's really, really daunting. But when you take the time to break it down, so Rosalind says subtasks with estimated time, that's a great idea. Small increments of success will fuel the flow. Exactly. And the truth is, like I can be looking at building a website, for instance. That's a big task, it's a project. When you think of it as a project, maybe it's not as big a project as it would be if it were a task, right? And so when we break it down into its pieces, then we really know what we're looking at. And the reassurance that we get from really knowing what we're looking at also helps to mitigate the feeling of overwhelm, right? So part of overwhelm comes from not knowing what we don't know. Not or stepping into the unknown. It's like, I don't know how to do that. And so therefore it becomes overwhelming. It becomes something that we'll avoid. Well, we can start breaking it down into chunks to start learning what it is we need to know. So let's say you're considering building a website. Well, you might, one of the first tasks might be to research what's involved in building a website. What are the steps to building a website? And then you can start getting information to break things down. So breaking things down to manageable pieces makes a huge difference. And so for instance, I just thought of an example. One of the things that I used to get kind of overwhelmed by when you so here's another dynamic that happens when you're overwhelmed. When you feel like there's a huge looming task, taking it on, getting started is really, really challenging. When you break it down into little pieces, you can be chipping away at it, and that makes it a whole lot easier, rather than saying, I'm going to do this whole big thing. So an example for me used to be balancing all my accounts, paying my bills and balancing all my accounts. And it was like, oh, it's going to take me a day. And when I allowed myself to break it down into the component pieces, like balancing each of the accounts individually, I could do that in the space of 5 minutes. I can balance one account. I can balance another account. And, so instead of saying I have to take it on all at once, I can do it piecemeal. And that way it's approachable. I can squeeze it in here or there. In between things, when I have a few minutes, I can make a quick phone call, or I can balance an account, or I can maybe write a quick email, or I can do some quick research. So this is something that makes things a whole lot more approachable. So what are we talking about? A couple things. First of all, prioritize. And so in prioritizing, what we want to do is to segment, actually, before prioritize, we want to segment our tasks into urgent, need to do, nice to do, all right, or want to do, or someday, one day. So we can put things in their context of urgency, and that helps to thin out the things that are on our immediate docket. Then we can be prioritizing those things that are on the immediate docket, and we can be breaking them down into component pieces, not just the immediate docket, but the other things that need to be gotten done. When we break them down into little pieces, then we can fit pieces in when we have extra moments. So, I have 5 minutes. That's not long enough time to go in and pay all my bills and balance all my accounts, but I certainly can do one right now. So Rosalind says, we tend to take it all on ourselves. Where can we ask for help? That's a great point, Rosalind, too. Do we place expectations on others to help and get disappointed when they don't play their part? So really, truly, this whole thing about overwhelm is very much about expectations. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up. And one of the things that we can do perhaps is delegate some of these to-dos, some of these tasks, some portions of projects, or even maybe entire projects we can possibly delegate to others. So that's one thing. And then when you talk about expectations, we're putting certain expectations on ourselves, like we should be able to get all this done. We should be able to whatever. And that's an important thing to be looking at. And in addition to the expectations we put on ourselves, it's really important to be looking at the expectations that we put on others. And just expectations in general can be really, really impacting our ability to be present, to be calm, to manage things. So part of the expectation thing is that sometimes we take on things that we shouldn't be taking on because we want to fulfill somebody else's expectation of us, or we have this notion that's kind of a denial notion that says I should be able to accomplish this, and thinking, that we have the time to take on that commitment. So actually the real thing that we started with is being in integrity in the in the commitments that we take on, meaning being willing to say, hey, I don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, and then there's dealing with somebody else's potential disappointment or your disappointment in yourself. So Rosalind says, I feel overwhelmed when I don't have time left at the end of the day for myself to enjoy unmanaged time. Should one schedule a block for downtime? Absolutely, Rosalind. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for that. We 100% should be scheduling, and I'm using the word should, I realize, but we would definitely benefit from scheduling time for ourselves, because if we don't care for ourselves, then we're not going to be able to fulfill all the obligations and responsibilities that we've taken on. So it's really important to allow for time for ourselves, even if we schedule in like 5-minute breaks or a 10-minute walk, or something that is going to nurture and nourish ourselves throughout the day, rather than becoming a doing machine. To be able to be present to our task. And another thing that could really help with managing potential overwhelm is giving ourselves a moment or several moments at the beginning of any task to set an intention for the time that we're going to be dedicating to that thing. And because oftentimes we just become robotic in our doingness, and we're not present. And when we do get present and when we do connect to intention, then that also relieves a whole lot of the overwhelm. So that's it for today. It was a rich topic. Thank you so much, Rosalind, and thank you so much for everybody else who's listening. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please check out the other awesome Enlightened World Network programming on also Enlightened World Living and EWN One with the Earth. And I am just so delighted to be with you, and grateful for your graciousness and your engagement. And until next time.